to do this. Thanks, Mike, for doing asking me to do it. I hesitated to put my name up there, and he asked me probably halfway through most of the speakers, and I said, okay, I'll commit to doing it. And that'll kind of apply to what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I feel inadequate sometimes getting up here to talk. I don't know if any of y'all have gotten up here and feel inadequate, like you're not capable or you're not able to do it. But I really feel inadequate talking about my faith story. It's really something that's hard for me to do. Maybe because I don't like talking about myself. Maybe because I'm an introvert and I don't like talking in front of crowds. I don't know. I talk in front of crowds a lot at work, so it's not something that I do fairly regularly. But I'm not sure if I have a story. I don't know if that makes sense, and I'll explain later. I'm not a storyteller. You can ask my kids. When I start telling a story, a make-up story, it ends up being terrible. But it is actually pretty hard to come up here and talk about myself. So when I was asked to do this, I thought of Scripture and the existence of God and what I believe. Skeptics debate the validity of God and the Scriptures, but no one can deny my story. No one can deny, it's my story. It is my personal experience with God. It's my story. It's very difficult for somebody to tell me that my story is inaccurate because it's my story. Paul, in Acts 26, gives his testimony, and I thought it was appropriate through my study of, what should I talk about. After King Agrippa was not convinced of his testimony, he says, in such a short time I can't be convinced. Paul says, short time or long, I pray that God, that not only you will, but all who are listening to me today become what I am, except for those in chains. So I hope you take away a little bit about today of maybe you apply it into your personal life, but here I go. So my story, pretty simplistic. Before I became a Christian, when I was a kid, I was a missionary kid. I was a preacher's son as well, the youngest of 5. I grew up in the church. I knew right from wrong. I knew the truth of the gospel. I knew that life with Christ was not an option. That's the way I grew up. I grew up in the church, almost in a sense that if you grew up in the church, you don't really feel that sense of lostness. I don't know if people that have grown up in the church really understand what true lostness is. Growing up in the mission field, you know what lostness is. You see the people that are lost, and you see the world around you. But I knew it to be right, and I knew it's what I wanted. When I did become a Christian at 17, when I was 2 weeks before I went off to college. I don't know if that's early or late in some standards, but it was my decision. I wasn't pressured. I knew, again, that it was the right thing to do. I know that I was in Christ. I knew I did it for the right reasons. I knew the gospel. I knew my conversion. I didn't have a doubt, 20 years later, whether or not I was saved or not. That wasn't an issue for me. But was I ready? I'm not sure. The reason I say that is because if ready means to be a faithful servant in the Lord's church, I wasn't equipped. I wasn't ready. To be ready, does it mean to live for others and serve others or live for myself? I wasn't ready. At 17, I wasn't ready. And I don't know how many 17-year-olds or younger can actually say that selfishness doesn't enter into their lives. It enters into our lives as adults today. But I think most people will, at some point, have always looked back at their baptism, of their conversion, and questioned and wondered, what was I really thinking at that point in time? And I think it's because of our immaturity. And so as I went to college, 17, 2 weeks of being a new Christian, grew up in the church, mission field, understood the truth. Being young, the world and state school that I went to, my focus was away from of serving. Poor decisions, got caught up in worldly things. Regardless of what I was involved in, I always knew, regardless of what I was involved in, good, bad, how terrible I thought it was, how maybe it wasn't that terrible to some people's perspective, but I always knew what was right. I never failed to I never acclimated to and became numb to right and wrong. That wasn't an issue for me. Maybe I wasn't doing the wrong things, not participating in the Lord's church like I should be, but I always knew that I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing. And that's a good thing. Once you lose the ability to determine whether you're doing the right or wrong, I think you're in sad shape. But I wasn't perfect. I know that Marty mentioned last week, we're not perfect, and that's why we have Christ. And I think everybody up here would say that they're not perfect. I would argue that most of us are far from perfect. But I knew what I wanted, and this is what I wanted. I knew as a young person, and my personality was one that I needed to know everything about driving before I got in the car. I still got in the car when I turned 16, but I was asking my dad at 12, 13, how slow do you need to get to before you make a right turn, or those kind of things. So my personality, I knew I had to know what was, so my personality, I knew I wanted to be in Christ. I knew I wanted to have a Christian family, and I knew I wanted to serve the Lord. I knew those things at a young age, even in college. I knew those things. I knew that if I didn't marry a Christian woman, my likelihood of some of these things were going to fall apart. I knew that when I was in college, that even though I was making some decisions that I probably wouldn't do now, I knew that when I get more mature, I know this is where I want to be. So I never lost hope of that vision. So one day, out of the blue, I decided that I was going to change, and I did. I transferred schools. I went from one state school to another state school, but I got rid of my baggage. I got rid of the friends, the people, bad company corrupts good morals. Rid myself of the things that dragged me down. Maybe that was an excuse not to stand up for what was right, to fight Satan and the temptations. But it was primarily because of my degree that I wanted to pursue. But it was a good excuse to leave anyway. Deep down, I know that it was more than that. It was more about reestablishing something. And that's one of the takeaways. If you're caught up in situations where if you don't know if it's the right thing or not, sometimes you have to cut ties. Sometimes you have to get rid of the friends that are bad influences. I know Jesus was able to mix and gather with sinners, but he was Jesus. So we have to be discerning about that in times, and we have to be real with ourselves about how we integrate with the world. So that's my journey. My journey became, I went to Texas Tech. I moved and got involved in the student ministry there. The first week I was there, I made a decision. That was my mentality. I'm going full force. Trying to live faithfully, meeting and developing friendships with those people that were being faithful or trying to be faithful. I eventually met Carrie. As Carrie and I, got married and we developed our relationship, and those things, we helped each other grow, and we understood. We had goals and visions for our family and for our service in the church. But all in all, I believe today I stand before you and say I'm faithful, and I'm committed to the church. I think a commitment to the church is, one of the things that it's an imperative. It's something that I grew up with. It's something that my parents instilled in me. And my point tonight, I had hardships, college, moving. I lived in Colombia, South America. There's a story behind the hardship of having to leave that country in 48 hours. Moving 8 times really brings your family closer together. Really, it kind of isolates you from the rest of the world when you move. Even coming up here to Oklahoma, my kids are closer than they ever have been. Why? Because they don't have any friends, right? They have each other. They've had each other for 2 years now, and they really get along. And, they're developing friendships, but moving is not an unhealthy thing. It's scary, it's stressful, but those temptations and struggles have definitely helped me in my walk. So with my short story, here's my emphasis tonight. It's not just my story. It's my personal experiences, and I like to call them, I don't know if you've ever heard this term, life commandment. What are my life commandments that have helped me get to where I am today and are going to help me get to where I am in 20 years. These are life commandments that my parents instilled in me. It's no doubt my parents, I'm a lot like my dad. So here's two. Life commandments, for example, here's one that's not related to the church, but you cook, you clean, right? That's my life commandment. Some people have you cook, I clean, or I cook, we help each other out. My life commandment is you cook, you clean. Now, when Carrie cooks, she does a lot of cleaning. When I cook, I clean up. That's just what I do. Personal responsibility. Fix something once, right when it's broken, or pretty soon, if you don't, you'll have two things that you have to fix, right? So if it breaks, fix it. It doesn't matter how much it costs. You got to fix it. Make it work. If you can't afford it, find somebody that can help you fix it. There's a lot more. I won't embarrass Carrie too much, but when we got married, nobody eats off my plate. Life commandment. Sorry, you don't dip into my plate, and that was just a life commandment. So those are some examples of life commandments. But here's two life commandments about the church that I've lived with and what my parents instilled on me. Number one of them is loving the brethren, loving them beyond their struggles, loving them wherever you're at, whatever situation you're in, wanting to be part of their lives. It's not easy for somebody that's not very social to want to hang out and talk to everybody. No offense, but I'm perfectly happy just sitting here by myself and everybody talking around me. That's my personality. Carrie thinks that I like making people uncomfortable. So if I ever feel like I'm making you uncomfortable when I talk, it's probably because I'm trying to do it on purpose. But I think making an effort, and this is what I saw in my parents, and Carrie asked me last night, do you really think this is true? And making an effort to make your church family more important than your blood family. I know that seems foreign to some people, but I saw it in my parents and the way they lived. The church was eternal. We are part of the church too, so it's a little different, but y'all are just as important to me as my brothers and sisters. I have great relationships with my brothers and sisters and with my parents, but the attitude and emphasis is the church is my family, right? Now, my socially awkwardness, you may not think that or you may not see that every day, but I don't have a problem with that anymore because Carrie will stay, 30 minutes after church having a good time talking. So she if it were me, I'd be ready to get out the door. But when I was single, I said that I set my time. I said, I got to be here for 15 minutes before I walk out that door. I made myself be there for 15 minutes. Not an easy thing to do. Second one is serving in the Lord's church. This was a life commandment for me and my parents, and they continually hammered it. You can always say no. My dad would always say, you can say no to, if I ask you to mow the lawn, you can say no. If I ask you to help your brother, you can say no. It's okay. We can talk about it, but you can say no. If you want to go out, if your friends are asking you to come over and they're putting pressure on you, you can say no. But he said when it's about the Lord's church and the work in the Lord's church, there's no excuses. You have to, don't say no, even if it's uncomfortable. I'm glad nobody's ever asked me to lead a singing because I'm a terrible singer. Mike asked me to come up here and talk about my faith story. Teaching me to teach Bible class, asking me to do things or do this or helping people move, whatever it is. If somebody asks me, I'm not going to say no. But if you're asking for volunteers and you're not asking me directly, that's a whole different story. But I grew up in a healthy. It's okay to get outside your comfort zone to learn, because if you've been asked, Corey asked me to help sub for the high schoolers. My life commandment says, yeah, I'll say yeah. And I may not have wanted to do it, but I know it's important for me. So one of the things that I learned, to be able to do that, you have to make the decision beforehand. You cannot sit there and say, when somebody asks me to do something, I'm going to decide then and there. I'm going to say, give me a few minutes. My decision's already made. When Carrie and I first got married, we skipped church one Sunday. It was probably one Sunday night. I don't know if it was Sunday morning or Sunday night. And we had a conversation. And this is probably because my parents, everywhere we went, we always went to, if we were driving to Oregon on Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, hey, let's go find somewhere to worship with the brethren. It wasn't like, well, this isn't our church family, we're going to head on. So it was one of those life commandments that I've learned. But Carrie and I, one Sunday night, we probably missed church. And we had a conversation who said, from now on, we're not going to skip. It was our decision. Now we're not perfect. Have we missed church? Sure. But it was one of those things where we're not going to make that decision on Sunday at 4 p.m. That decision's already been made for us. I think I've ran out of time, but those are 2 life commandments, 2 practical things that I would say that have helped me get to where I am today. I think if we can teach our youth to loving the brethren and learning to serve in the church when they go off to college. One of the difficulties that I see is our youth, when they go off to college, they're so tied to their home church. When they go off into another church, they don't know how to acclimate to other churches. So it's near and dear to me because I went through it as part of being somebody that went to college and didn't have a place to acclimate to. So thanks.